Assalamu alaikum. We are back in business with another video. The HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index Fund. What it is, what it's made up of, and probably the question that most people want to know, which version to buy, because a lot of people see the BC, IC, BC, GBP, AC. There's lots of different versions of this fund, and we are going to clear up once and for all which is the best version to buy this fund and the actual differences between them. Let's start off with a clarification. HSBC actually have two World Islamic funds, a Islamic ETF World Fund and a Islamic Global Equity Index Fund. So let me bring them up to show them to you, just so you can see the difference. So this is the HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index Fund, and they also have the HSBC MSCI World Islamic UCITS ETF. So first of all, do not confuse these two funds. We are talking about this Islamic Equity Index Fund and not the ETF. And in this specific video, we're not actually going to be covering the differences between them, but just to make it clear from the very beginning, we're not talking about this fund. So let me just get rid of that. We are talking about this one. So let's start off with, what is it? It is an equity fund made by HSBC. What are some salient features about this fund? Firstly, it's a passively managed fund, meaning the fund manager doesn't actively choose the stocks that go into the fund. The opposite to a passively managed fund is an actively managed fund, where the fund manager goes out and makes decisions about what goes in and what doesn't go into the fund. And we can see that here on this fact sheet. So I've just searched up the fund, found the fact sheet for it. And if we go down here on the side, you'll see a reference benchmark. So the benchmark is the Dow Jones Islamic Market Titans 100 Net Total Return Index. That is the index that this fund just tries to copy. It doesn't do anything apart from try and copy that index as much as possible. And you can see down here in this graph, it shows you actually the fund and the benchmark that is trying to copy as much as possible. Now, there's always going to be slight differences between how the fund performs and how the benchmark performs, just because of transaction costs and costs for the fund, and the ability of the fund to copy what's exactly in the index in the best possible way. But, the difference between them is going to be tiny. So just keep that in mind. HSBC they don't hire a super fund manager who is choosing what goes into the fund. That's not the reason why this fund has been doing so well. But we're not going to get into why it's doing so well just quite yet, but we will touch on it later on. So other than it being a passively managed fund, it's also an equity fund, so it only invests in equities, and it's an Islamic fund, so it only invests in halal equities. And which Sharia screening body does it use to check if the equities are halal? It doesn't use AOF, it doesn't use MSCI, it actually uses Dow Jones. So Dow Jones do themselves some Islamic screening, and that's how they find the stocks to buy in the fund. I'm actually not a great big fan of this fund, but it just so happens to be doing very well over and over again. So lots of people like talking about it. So here we are talking about it. And I will tell you why I don't like it, but not just yet. So let's try and find this fund on a brokerage account. So this is AJ Bell, which is a brokerage. And let's search for HSBC Islamic. Oh, here we go. You can see I found 1, 2, 3, 4 different HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index funds. So they all have the same name apart from this little suffix at the end. One says BC, one says IC, one says BD, one says IC. What's really confusing is there's two IC. There's only one BC and there's one BD. So that's the first confusing point. Lots of people don't know which one to actually go for. And it's not just a symptom that AJ Bell suffers from. Let's check it out on Hargreaves Lansdown, which is another brokerage company. HSBC is that. Oh, I already searched it. Let me just click here because I already searched it while doing my research. And we go to there's a section here just above my head that says funds. So let's view all results for funds. Fund finder. Here we go. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So what's quite confusing is on Hargreaves Lansdown, you don't have IC. You have AC, AD, BC, BD. So now we have even more versions. We have the AC version, the BC and BD that we had before, and the IC, which Hargreaves Lansdown doesn't have, but AJ Bell does have. So you can see why it's super confusing. Again, just for argument's sake, let's check it out on one other brokerage company. This time we're looking at Interactive Investor, another brokerage similar to Hargreaves Lansdown and AJ Bell. We search HSBC Islamic, which I have already done, and we can see BC, BD, IC. So they have three. They don't have the AC or the, what was the other one? AD, that Hargreaves Lansdown. They don't have the AC or the AD, but they do have the BC, BD, and one of the ICs that AJ Bell had. There's other brokerages as well that have it. Prosper have this fund as well. Again, another brokerage company. Prosper's quite cool because they don't have any platform fees. And you can see it there, HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index Fund, but they don't tell you what version they have. But we will be able to work out what version they have after we dive into it a little bit more. And I'm not going to drive the point home even more, but even Charles Stanley, if you search up HSBC Global Equity Index, they'll have a few. This one here is the IC version. Now it's the big part. Which one do you actually choose and what are the differences? Well, I produced this very nifty table here, all the different versions of the funds and what brokerages have it. AJ Bell have 4 different ones, Hargreaves Lansdown have 4 different ones. It's quite small actually. Let me zoom in. Class, let's actually say, yes, what the fund is called. If it's accumulation or income, the currency of the fund. So these are the two main differences. If it's 1, accumulation, or 2, distribution, and what currency the fund is denominated in. So let's first explain the difference between accumulation and distribution for those who don't know, and what difference the currency of the fund actually makes. Accumulation. Sometimes when you invest into a company, that company generates profits. Sometimes when it generates profits, it likes to pay out those profits to investors in the form of a dividend. Not every company pays out a dividend, but some do. So when a fund invests into so many different companies, a fund has a decision to make. Should it pay out the dividend it receives to the investors of the fund, or should it take those dividends and reinvest it into the same stocks that are already in the fund? So that's the difference between accumulation, which reinvests the dividends, and income funds, which just pay out any dividends that they get. The nice thing about an accumulation fund is that you don't have to worry about any small uninvested amounts in your account that get kicked out as income from the fund. That's why the majority of people go for accumulation funds. However, if you are investing specifically for income, like if you're a dividend investor or something like that, you may want to go for the income version. Now, as for the currency, some of the versions of this fund are in sterling and some of them are in US dollar. All right, so what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to explain the reasons why there is no difference between investing in a sterling and dollar fund for now, but I will just tell you there is going to be no material difference if you choose the sterling version or US dollar version of this fund, because the majority of the underlyings in this fund are based in dollars anyway. The only difference for you in reality will be the FX fees that you pay when you invest in the dollar version, if you're based in the UK, that is. For that reason, it only makes sense to go for the sterling versions. So, if we get rid of the dollar versions, okay, so now we have the choice of only 3 left because we got rid of the dollar ones. So now if you want the income one, this is the one to go for. BDGBP. It's available on AJ Bell, it's available on Hargreaves Lansdown, and it's available on Interactive Investor, and it might be available on some other brokers too. Now, if you didn't want income and you wanted the accumulation one, which I imagine most people would want, you are now left with 2 choices, the BCGBP and the ICGBP. For those of you who are keen-eyed, you might see in the fee section, one of them has fees of 0.62% and one of them has fees of 0.52%. So naturally, you want to go for the one with 0.52% fees, the one with lower fees, so long as it's exactly the same for you as investing in the one with higher fees. So let's try and find out why there is a difference in fees between them. And actually, you'll notice the 0.52% fund isn't even available on Hargreaves Lansdown. So perhaps you shouldn't be investing in this fund on Hargreaves Lansdown because it's cheaper to invest into it on AJ Bell because you can choose the IC version. Interestingly, someone had the same question, which they posted on the IFG forum back in January 2024. And they said the same thing, that the IC, it's the same as the BC, but with a 0.12% less charge. Now that charge seems to have tightened up. Maybe they changed the fees on the fund. Now the difference is only 0.1%. But they go on to say down here that the IC and the BC are exactly the same. However, the IC is cheaper per share on an ongoing cost basis. And they're exactly right. But what they didn't get quite right is the reasons. They only came with some guesses of the reasons. Restructuring, exposure to different markets, use of share classes for financial machinery or governance. Machinery. Not sure what they meant there by machinery. Interestingly, before we actually find out what the difference is, if you search for this fund on Financial Times, which has all the different funds on it, there's actually 32 different versions of this fund. But a lot of them you won't find out on any of the brokers. A lot of them are just saved just for example, pension funds. So you won't be able to access it via traditional brokers. Like this one is just for Aviva. This one's for Fidelity, Aviva, Phoenix. So if you invest in this fund via Aegon, you'll actually be invested in a special version made just for Aegon, which most likely has lower fees because it's a pension fund, and no one wants to look bad charging high fees on pensions. So now let's get to the actual answer as to why they're different. There's this information memorandum sent out in September 2024, so not too long ago, but I think they send it out somewhat regularly, so I'm sure it was available before then. And if you scroll down, they actually have the different versions of the funds and the differences between them. Might just cut this out of the video, eh? Make it look like I was prepared. So here we go. The classes of the fund: Class A, Class B, Class E, Class I. So all we care about at the moment is Class B and Class I, because they're the two funds that we have left, if you remember. From here, we have the Class B and the Class I. One of them has lower fees, one of them has higher fees. Class B shares are available to sub-distributors who are prohibited from accepting and retaining inducements from third parties. Sub-distributors who have separate free arrangements with their clients in relation to the provision of investment services. So it's basically for any broker. Any broker can offer out the B shares. They have a minimum investment of $5,000. The I shares are only available for institutions qualifying as institutional, with the meaning of Article 174 2010 law, which seems to be a European law. Anyway, the minimum investment amount is $1 million into the IC fund. However, in reality, you don't actually need $1 million because it seems the platform needs to have a minimum of £1 million invested and not the individual investor, which is why some platforms can offer it out and seemingly other platforms can't. Or maybe they haven't clocked on that they can add it, because in theory, if AJ Bell has $1 million invested into this fund, Hargreaves Lansdown should also have $1 million, because I believe Hargreaves Lansdown is larger. But anyway, that's the difference. So if that's the only difference, that the iShares was made for institutional, and because of the higher investment amount, they decided to lower the fees, but they've made the institutional available to retail, why not just go for the institutional one? Because it's available to everyone now, and it has lower fees. So that's the one to go for. So let's just highlight it one more time, the actual one to go for. It has this ISIN ending in 776. It's the ICGBP class accumulation, has fees of 0.52%, and it's available on AJ Bell and Interactive Investor. If you want to know the CDOL on it, it's BMVDH00. I'll put it in the video description. I did, when I was initially doing my research, I saw that it has a minimum £1 million investment, $1 million investment. However, that's not true. The brokers still let you buy it, even if you're not putting in $1 million. So we can just delete that. Interestingly enough, I found this cool website, fund.com. And on that website, it has all the different HSBC funds, and it shows every single broker where you can buy that HSBC fund. Isn't that neat? And it even shows how much is invested into each version of the fund. So if we get rid of the HSBC funds that you can't actually buy on any platform because it says NA here, you click on this button, it says with platforms only. So we're left with 6 different versions of the funds that you can actually buy in the UK. And it shows you the brokers here that you can buy them with: AJ Bell, Interactive Brokers, Hargreaves Lansdown, Interactive Brokers, and some of them you can buy on a few platforms. So the BD versions, or the B versions, which are available to all brokers, are the ones that have the most people that you can invest into this fund with. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the other one, the BC one, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that makes sense for the BD ones. But now that we know that the IC GBP is cheaper, that's the one we want. Do remember there is the other IC one, but that one's in US dollars. That's not the one you want. You want the IC GBP, which is this top one. And the brokers that you can buy it with are AJ Bell, Interactive Brokers, and Charles Stanley. Obviously, we saw that you can buy it with Interactive Investor too, so they don't cover the full market. However, it's a good way to find out who does actually have this fund and where you can buy it. And it does say the charge here, 0.52%. Let me just zoom in for you. Can I zoom in? Zoom in. There we go. That's the one with the with the cheap fees on it. So that's the one to go for. I feel like I must have bored everyone's socks off by now, talking about the technicalities of the HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index Fund. But one more thing. The last thing I wanted to say is why this fund has performed so well. But let's just look how well it has actually performed. This page. This is a page of 5 Islamic funds that have been around for 5 years or more, and it shows you the performance of them each year for the past 5 years. We have the HSBC Islamic Global Equity Index Fund, and we have some other ones to compare it to. Now, in 2022, when funds were going down, you can see which one was the worst. The one that was down 25%, guess which one it was? It was this exact fund. But in 2020, which was a good year for stocks, this was one of the best performers. In 2021, it wasn't the best performer, but it was up there. In 2023, it was joint best performer with SPUS. And in 2024, it was also joint best performer with SPUS. Now, if you remember what we said earlier, this is a passive fund. So it's not like the fund manager is a genius and he's picking amazing stocks that you can buy. Just think about it. In bad years, they're the worst performer. In good years, they're one of the best performers. Therefore, it's just volatility. This fund just has a lot of volatility. Now, you might need to be asking now, why is this fund quite volatile? The reason it's quite volatile is because this fund only holds a small number of shares. Yeah, so most Islamic funds hold around 300 shares in them. This fund holds a lot less. And when you hold a fewer number of shares, it normally means that your fund can be more volatile. So if we zoom in here, you can see that this fund only holds 100 different stocks in it. That's the reason for its volatility. And obviously it holds stocks majority in the tech sector, which can be quite volatile, like Nvidia, Apple, Microsoft. So our conclusion, if you want to buy this fund, go for the IC GBP version, which is available on AJ Bell, Interactive Investor, and a couple of others. Don't glorify this fund for its amazing performance. It's only done well because it's volatile. It does the worst in bad years and it does one of the best in good years. It has actually got high fees compared to other Islamic funds. So the fees, even on the cheap version, is 0.52% versus on some other Islamic funds, it's 0.3%. So, but other than that, maybe it's not a terrible fund to go for, but just something to keep in mind. So I hope you learned something from that. Obviously, if you like this type of content, let us know. If there's anything we can improve, also let us know. And if you want to see more of this stuff, maybe you can subscribe.